So, I want to first thank Jay for making me look bad, because I wasn't going to tell you you're beautiful. So, but now you know, right? So, if you've been with us for the past couple of weeks, we've been going through a series entitled From Knucklehead to Hero, where we've been looking at individuals in the Bible who had rough starts, right? Who made mistakes, who had done some bad things, and we looked at their stories and watched their transformation from this knuckleheaded idea to becoming heroes. First, we looked at John Mark, who was, by all accounts, a coward, right? He ran away out of fear when he was needed the most. And we look at his story and his transition and find him later on being pivotal in the formation of the church in Alexandria. Then we looked at James, the half-brother of Jesus, who struggled with doubt and with disbelief about who Jesus was and what he actually represented. And we see through his story that at the end of it, he ended up being the leader of the church in Jerusalem. And today we're going to continue on in that series and look at somebody a little different. Today I am going to, as I believe the saying goes, go all Old Testament on you. We're going to be looking at Moses. And he was really interesting to me. When you think about Moses, the first thing that comes to mind typically is not knucklehead, right? Sure, he made some poor choices and did some bad things, but had a pretty solid life, right? He accomplished a tremendous amount. He's a pretty big part of the Old Testament. And I think that his story really, when you look at it, resonates with a lot of us, because that's the way a lot of our lives are. Right? It's typically not just, for most people, a definitive line, a transitionary period where I went from bad to good. It's, I do a lot of good, and intermingled in that are some poor choices. So today I want to look at Moses, and I think that there are some things situationally that I think we can learn from him. As I normally do, I want to start off with a little bit of background. I'm not going to go into a tremendous amount for two reasons. First, because he has like 4 books of the Bible, and this would take a long time to go through everything. And second, most people are pretty familiar with the high-level version of Moses, what his life was. So I'm going to give you, as we like to say in the business world, the 50,000-foot view of his life. So Moses lived to be around 120 years old, and his life was broken up into 3 distinct segments. The first 40 years of his life is what most people have seen, like in the movies and such, where the cartoon, I think, was called The Prince of Egypt, right? So Moses, we know the story, was put into the Nile River and was to save his life, and was adopted by the Pharaoh's daughter. And there, for the first 40 years of his life, he lived a life as a prince, as Egyptian royalty. He was taught by the best. He was trained by the best. He had everything that he could possibly want in life. Right? He lived a remarkable life at the cost of his people. At some point in time, he learns of his heritage, and it really becomes a burden on him. Right, Moses in the first 40 years was an impulsive person, an emotional person. We find that where he sees an Egyptian beating a Hebrew man, and he intervenes and kills the man, murders him. And instead of facing the penalty, he flees. We see Moses into the second 40 years of his life, and it's completely different, right? He runs away and becomes this family man. He finds a wife and learns the life of a shepherd. He has children, and he learns to live a life of quiet, of patience, a more meek life than he came from. Something very different from the first 40 years to his second. And it's here we see Moses encounter the burning bush, where God, he tells him that he's going to be his vessel that he's going to use to lead the Israelite people out of slavery, out of Egypt. And here we see Moses doubts, right? He doubts his ability. He doubts God. He doesn't trust God, that God will provide him with what's needed. And God constantly reminds him and gives him the tools that he needs. And then we see the last 40 years where Moses is wandering through the wilderness, and he's leading this what oftentimes is an ungrateful group of people that he's led out of slavery, and time again has, through God, provided for them. And it's in this you see the story of the Ten Commandments and other miraculous things that Moses does. And that's where we're going to camp out today at the end of this journey, at the end of the last 40 years of his life. So we're going to be looking in Numbers. This Numbers chapter 20, and we're going to be looking at verses 1 through 13. I believe it's page 154 in your pew Bible, if you want to follow along. In the first month, the whole Israelite community arrived at the desert of Zin, and they stayed at Kadesh. Now, the first month of the last year that they were wandering, there Miriam died and was buried. Now, it's important to understand, so the end of his journey, he's 120-ish years old. And Miriam, it's important to note here, is his sister. So a little bit of context to the situation. He's been wandering for a long time, towards the end of his journey, and his sister has just died, right? And just died and buried. Now there was no water for the community, and the people gathered in opposition to Moses and Aaron. They quarreled with Moses and said, "If only we had died when our brothers fell dead before the Lord. Why did you bring us, the Lord's community, into this wilderness that we and our livestock should die here? Why did you bring us up out of Egypt into this terrible place? Egypt, they were slaves. They're thirsty. You put two and two together. It has no grain or figs, grapevines or pomegranates, and there is no water to drink." Moses and Aaron went from the assembly to the entrance of the tent of meeting, and fell face down, and the glory of God appeared to them. The Lord said to Moses, "Take the staff, and you and your brother Aaron gather the assembly together. Speak to the rock before their eyes, and it will pour out its water. You will bring water out of the rock for the community so they and their livestock can drink." So Moses took the staff from the Lord's presence, and just as he commanded him, he and Aaron gathered the assembly together in front of the rock, and Moses said to them, "Listen, you rebels, must we bring you water out of this rock?" Then Moses raised his arm and struck the rock twice with his staff. Water gushed out, and the community and their livestock drank. But the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, "Because you did not trust in me enough to honor me as holy in the sight of the Israelites, you will not bring this community into the land I have given them." These were the waters of Meribah, where the Israelites quarreled with the Lord, and where he was proved holy among them. So Moses is having a pretty tough time, right? He's 120 years old. He's been wandering through the wilderness for 40 years. And he's been leading a group of people who, for the most part, consistently disobeyed God and were distrustful. His sister has just died, and he makes an impulsive decision. He makes an impulsive choice, and he doesn't trust God, and he disobeys. But it's easy, right? It's easy for us to do that, to make decisions out of impulse, to make decisions out of emotion. I can remember I was 18 years old, and I had just moved out of the house, and I was living with a roommate, and just finished a shift at work. Now, this was a late shift, so I was getting home right around 9:30 or so. And my roommate at the time, he comes in and says, "Mike, let's take a walk." So I thought, okay, that's a little weird for one guy to say to another guy, but hey, I have nothing better to do. It's 9:30, let's go for a walk. What else do we have to do? So we decide we're going to walk to the entrance of Fleming Island Plantation, right? Just walk to the entrance of Fleming Island Plantation. So we set off on our journey, 9:30 at night, going to walk to the entrance of the Fleming Island Plantation and back. Now, what's important to realize about this is that at the time, I lived near the Chili's on Wells Road. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with that, Chili's on Wells Road, entrance to Fleming Island Plantation, 12 miles one way. 9:30 at night, 12-mile one-way walk. Why not, right? So we start our journey, And it's going great. The first half of the journey is amazing. We're trucking along, feeling great. Second half of the journey, not so much, right? Turns out that when you're tired and you have fatigue and you're sore, the last half of the journey was very, very tough and took like twice as long as the first half. So we walk and we walk and we walk. And on the way back, it got so bad that we would walk a couple hundred yards and have to sit down and take our shoes off and rest, right? And it got so bad that we would sit down and we would literally be laying on the sidewalk and sprinklers would be spraying reclaimed water on us. So we smell terrible, we're tired, we're exhausted, but we finished it. Right, we ended up getting home, I think it was 3:30 or 4 in the morning. So 9:30 to 4 in the morning, we walked. It was an interesting journey, and really the only thing that came out of it is a sermon illustration that I can speak of right now. So, but it's easy, right? The writing was on the wall for us. If we would have just thought back to all the opportunities where we walked before, right, and thought about how terrible it would be to walk 12 miles, we might have come up with a different choice, a different decision. Moses, right, the writing's on the wall for him too. He starts off so well. He does this, he goes and he falls face down, seeking God's guidance. And instead of obeying, instead of thinking back to all the times where God provided for him and where God was faithful, he makes an impulsive choice. He makes a mistake. He disobeys. But there's something important I think we can glean from that. And it's this reality that even when we make mistakes, we can still be used by God. You see, God has a choice here. The Israelite people, time and time again, had disobeyed him. And now their leader openly disobeyed him in front of everyone. He has a choice. He could choose to give them what they actually deserved. He could choose not to provide, but he does something that so oftentimes God does, and he provides what they need. But there was a price, right? There was a price to be paid for that. As I was reading through the story, something really didn't sit well with me. As I'm reading through and I'm thinking about the life of Moses and all the amazing things that he accomplished, this idea that a singular mistake would cost him so dearly. You see it at the end of the verse or the end of the story where God speaks to Moses, and because he disobeyed, he wasn't going to bring these people into the promised land. And I couldn't imagine being Moses at that particular point in time. So you're telling me that I make a mistake, and these people, the complainers, the people who have mutinied, this second generation of people that I've helped deliver out of slavery, I'm not going to make it in, but they are? And I'm thinking through this and going, how do I make sense of that? How does 1 + 1 = 2 in this situation? And I couldn't come up with a good answer. And as I'm thinking through, it occurred to me, and there's this reality, and it's something that so oftentimes when we talk about things of faith that we have to wrap our head around, and it's this, is that God's plan is so much larger and so much more complex than anything we'd be able to comprehend. But God's plan is perfect. God's plan will always get it right, and the relief in that is that no matter what we do, right or wrong, good or bad, nothing that we do as individuals is going to stop that plan from coming to fruition, from coming to be. God had a plan here. We see it at the end, and he mentions it, that he disobeyed. And through his disobedience, God was looking to show his holiness to the Israelites. He was looking to remind them. Right up to this point, many of the miracles that Moses had done were physical. Right? They involved him physically doing something. The calling of the plagues, the parting of the Red Sea, the bronze serpent, the summoning of the water the first time, all involved physical things. And here God had a different idea. I want to show my people who I am. I want to show them that I am holy and that I am to be trusted and that I am to be obeyed. You see, the Israelite people time and time again had disobeyed. God had given them commandments and told them what to do, what was necessary. And time again, they sometimes did the exact opposite. God delivers them from the Pharaoh, parts the seas. Moses goes, he brings the 10 Commandments down, and what do? Make an idol. So often, the miracles were physical, and God's intention was to do something different, to remind the people of their hard hearts towards Him. As to say that, listen, all I'm asking you to do is hear me, to obey me. The rocks, as hard as they are, even they obey my commands when I speak. But humans, like we so often do, mess that up. Moses, in his disobedience and his lack of faith, takes matters into his own hands. He strikes the rock not once but twice. God still provides, but God had a plan here, so he went about it a different route. So instead of showing his holiness through this amazing act of speaking to the rock and it obeying, and Moses being used as a vessel to provide an example, now becomes the example. Now Moses, the greatest among them, the leader for 40 years, who had led them out of captivity, and in God's justice says this, that even the greatest among you is not subject and is not excluded from obeying me. And through his justice and the faithfulness in that justice, God reminds them that he is holy, that he is one to be obeyed. There's one final thing that I'd like for us to share as we're going through this, and it's this reality. And it's really, to me, as I think through all of the individuals in the Bible, and even us in our lives, that is really the center point of this from knucklehead to heroes idea. And it's this. It's the reality that we all make mistakes. We all have failures. We all have deficiencies. But in God's kingdom, that doesn't have to be what defines us. That doesn't have to be what we're remembered for. Growing up, I grew up poor, as I think a lot of you know, and sports were a big part of my life. When you're poor, all you need is a ball and an open space, and you can pretty much do whatever you want, right? So sports were a pretty big aspect of my childhood. And my favorite sport was basketball. Right? I love to watch basketball. I love to try to play basketball, but my 6-inch vertical leap, and as I think I was in a sermon once, or listening to a sermon, and the preacher said, it was built for comfort, not for speed. And that's really me to a T. So I enjoy watching basketball. I'm not very good at playing it. And like so many people, my favorite player was Michael Jordan. Now, if you've had the opportunity to watch him play, which most of you, I believe you have, he was amazing to watch. When he was on, nobody could stop him. It didn't matter who was on his team. It didn't matter who he was playing against. He did what he wanted to do on the basketball court, and will widely be regarded as probably the greatest player to ever play the game, unless someone really amazing comes along. But he was not without mistakes, right? Just like all of us, he had issues, he did things. He had some stats that were not all that great. I want to share a few with you. Some of the things that typically don't meet the highlight reel. 12,345. That is the number of missed shots that he took in his career. 51. That's the percentage that 12,000 represents. So he missed more than he made. 300. It's the number of losses in his career, plus or minus a few if you count the playoffs or you don't count the playoffs. 26. That's the number of game-winning shots that he took that he didn't make. 1979. That's the year that Jordan failed to make his high school basketball team. Could you imagine being that coach that cut Michael Jordan? 1993. That's the year that Jordan started his wildly unsuccessful baseball career. I also had the privilege of watching him play here in Jacksonville, and he was not all that great. His name went a long way to getting him on the roster, I think. The list goes on and on. We could keep going on, but the reality is that Michael Jordan won't be remembered for those things. He's going to be remembered for the rings, for the multiple MVPs, for the offensive or the defensive player of the years. He won't be remembered for the 26 missed game-winning shots. He'll be remembered for the one game-winning shot in North Carolina that people show over and over and over again. He'll still be remembered as the greatest basketball player that's ever played in light of all the mistakes, all of the failures that he's had. You see, we live in a world that isn't like that. We live in a world where, for the most part, our worth is based on the accomplishments that we have. It's based on the things that we do. And things like failures, failed marriages, failed careers, children who go astray, less than ideal socioeconomic statuses, sicknesses, addictions. All of these things the world looks at and says, that's what you're defined as. That's how you're going to be remembered. But in God's kingdom, it's different. God looks at your failures. He looks at the mistakes that you've made. He looks at the ways that you've messed up. He looks at the things that you've done wrong. And that's not how your worth is determined. He sees those things instead as the things that are leading you or have led you back to Him. The world sees scars and disappointment in all of us. But it's different through God's eyes. God, instead of seeing those things, He sees a child that was made in His image for His purpose and for His glory. God's kingdom is different. Moses, he did so many amazing things, but he had some pretty knuckleheaded ideas too. He was a murderer. He was prone to impulsive decisions. He made bad choices. But he also persevered. If you follow on in this story, after being told by God he went into the promised land, that did not deter him from the mission that he had. He saw it through to the best of his ability. He appointed the person that would replace him, and eventually the Israelite people were brought to the promised land. And on his death on Mount Nebo, he was able to catch a glimpse of it. You see, Moses, through his perseverance, will not be remembered as the one who was angry or the one who got it wrong, but will widely be regarded as one of the greatest, if not the greatest prophet of the Old Testament. We all have the same opportunity. We all will make mistakes. We all will make bad choices. We've all done it. I'm a case study in that. But what will you do today? Will you hold on to the knuckleheaded choices that you've made, to the bad decisions that you've done in your life? Or will you embrace the opportunity, the infinite potential that you have in Christ? All He calls for is obedience. All He calls for is trust in Him. And you could be used to do amazing things as well. Would you pray with me?